Alright, I'm going.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday's education program. My name is Rachel, education specialist here at the Topeka Zoo, and today we are going to talk about 5th grade curriculum relating to interdependent relationships. As always, this is enjoyable for every age group, and I'm actually really excited about today's lesson because it's something that doesn't get talked about that often. So last week, we were talking about 5th grade curriculum. We went over the food chain and how plants get their energy from the sun, they are producers, and animals get their energy either by eating each other or by eating the plants. They are consumers. And when we talked about this, we mostly talked about a food chain as a predator-prey relationship. And those are relationships in an ecosystem where one animal is eating another. However, today, I want to talk about other types of relationships in an ecosystem because sometimes animals can coexist with one another without actually eating them. So we're going to talk about 2 types of interdependent relationships. Interdependent is just a fancy word for saying 2 animals that kind of live together, coexist, and are dependent on each other. So the first type of interdependent relationship is what we call symbiosis. You might have also heard of this as a symbiotic relationships. And there's 3 different kinds. What symbiosis is it's a close and long-term interaction between differing organisms where they're not eating one another, they might just live near each other or use each other to benefit. So the 3 types. The first type of symbiosis is what we call mutualism. And as the name suggests, mutualism is where 2 differing organisms benefit by being near each other. So an example in the picture here is a bee and a flower. This bee is drinking nectar from the flower, getting all of the energy that it needs to survive. The flower is releasing pollen that gets all over the bee's body and legs. And when the bee moves to another flower, that pollen moves from the first flower to the second and leads to pollination, which leads to that flower creating another one. It's reproducing. So by having the bee and the flower live next to each other or near each other, these animals are both benefiting. The bee gets food, and the flowers get reproduced via pollination. So where 2 animals benefit, that is mutualism in the symbiotic relationship. Now the next one is what we call commensalism. And this is where one animal benefits and the other species is simply not affected. So the picture here is a picture of a type of fish. It is called a remora fish. And this is a type of fish that lives near or even attached to different types of sharks. Now these fish are small enough that the sharks really don't want to use their energy to eat them, so they leave the fish alone. But those fish hanging out near a shark will actually eat all of the scraps that the shark eats after it falls off the shark's mouth. So if the shark has made a big kill and some of that thing that it's eating is kind of falling off, these little fish then get the food as well. When I was scuba diving in Australia, I saw an excellent example of mutualism with sharks, where there were these small little fish that actually cleaned the shark's teeth. I was diving and there was a reef shark there, and I saw these little cleaner fish going in and out of the shark's mouth, cleaning all the bits of food off their teeth. That then went to mutualism, because the fish were getting food, and the shark was getting a free trip to the dentist. It was one of the coolest experiences I've ever seen. Another example of commensalism would be a gopher tortoise. Gopher tortoises dig really deep burrows. Well, gopher tortoises, they move from one territory to the next. And after they move, that burrow is then abandoned. And other animals like snakes or foxes might use it as shelter. So the snakes and the foxes get a home, and the gopher tortoise isn't affected because it's moved on. So commensalism is one benefits, and the other just isn't affected. Now, the final example of symbiosis is parasitism. And as the name suggests, that is where one species benefits and the other is actually harmed. So for instance, think of when a mosquito bites you. The mosquito is benefiting because it's getting nutrients from us as humans, but we're getting harmed because it hurts and it itches and it doesn't feel good. So in all three of these examples, these animals are not eating one another, they're not killing one another, they are simply dependent on one another for good, for bad, or kind of in the middle. But that is what a symbiotic relationship is, and there's lots of examples in the animal kingdom. Now, the other type of interdependent relationship I want to talk about today are invasive species. So what an invasive species is it's an organism that is not native to the area. However, invasive species take it a step further. They not only are not native to the area, but they harm the area that they are moving to. They can cause great economic and environmental harm, they adapt well, and they oftentimes reproduce quickly. So the difference between an invasive species, one that harms, as opposed to a non-native species, is non-native species can be moved to a new area that they're not normally from, but they don't harm the environment. Many of the animals and plants that we eat, like chickens and cows and many of our crops, are non-native. But humans control them to the point where they are not invading into the ecosystem and harming. So invasive species have to also harm the environment as well. And again, they're oftentimes not killing and eating the other animals, but they're taking resources from the animals that are supposed to live in that environment. So let's look at a few examples so I can show you a little bit more about what I mean. Here is a local example of an invasive species. These are zebra mussels, which is an aquatic invertebrate. These guys, they kind of look like clams, and they're originally from Europe and Asia. However, earlier in the 1900s, these guys actually attached themselves to a boat that was leaving Europe and Asia and came over to the United States. Well, when they got to the United States, they detached from the boat and started taking over our waterways, our lakes and rivers. Well, these mussels, they're not very big. They're about the size of a fingernail or a little bit bigger, but they group together in clusters of hundreds or thousands of mussels, and they do some real damage. Here is a picture of a whole grouping of zebra mussels on a boat propeller. You can bet that the owner of this boat was not happy when he saw all the mussels on here, because that causes the boat propeller to not work. Other examples of mussels affecting our infrastructure, our buildings and our pipes and our boats, is right here. Here is a picture of zebra mussels who have actually clogged a drainage pipe. These drainage pipes drain water into our lakes and our rivers and our ponds. When zebra mussels get into those pipes and clog them by the thousands, we can't get the water movement that we need. If you look here, these are zebra mussels that have actually attached themselves onto our native animals. These are zebra mussels that are on a crayfish. and zebra mussels that are on one of our big Kansas mussels. These zebra mussels are really affecting those animals. By attaching to them, it's stopping them from finding food, from finding shelter, and from being comfortable. The problem with many invasive species is that they are hard to control. One zebra mussel can lay 1 million eggs, and they are microscopic. So the only way to get rid of zebra mussels is for boat owners to actually clean their boats thoroughly with soap and water. And it's not just your boats, it could be your boots or your equipment or anything that is in the water. Unfortunately, we now have zebra mussels in Lake Shawnee, in Lake Perry, and many of our waterways here in Kansas. There are chemicals that scientists have used to get rid of zebra mussels, but they require constant application as well. So many times, researchers and scientists find themselves in a really big struggle trying to control invasive species. Here's another example that you might not think about. House cats. House cats, these animals are not native to Kansas in North America. They are not normally in our ecosystems. They have been domesticated over thousands of years to be pets, and they could be really good pets. But feral cats who don't have a home, or sometimes even people's pets, they let them outside. And what happens is these house cats kill birds and mammals in our native ecosystems, in the prairies, the woodlands, the wetlands, and they do it by the billions. That's right, the billions. A study done by the Smithsonian and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2013 found that cats in the United States alone killed between 1 and 3.7 billion birds and between 6.9 and 20 billion small mammals each year in our country. So you guys, if you have a house cat, that's great. I have 2 myself, but please just make sure they don't go outside, and if they're outside, maybe have them on a leash or make them a little catio that they can stay in and enjoy the outside, but they are not killing the native wildlife along the way. Now, one other example of an invasive species is actually the animal we are going to meet today. Now, it's not this exact species, but it is animals like him. So I am going to get out one of our favorite education animals. He is a big boy, but he is very nice, so there is nothing to be afraid of. His name is Rocky, and he is actually a rescue animal. He used to be somebody's pet, and they couldn't take care of him anymore, and they did the responsible thing by giving him to us. So give me just 1 second. We're gonna meet Mr. Rocky. To give you a hint as to what he is, his full name is Rocky Balboa. Alrighty. So you guys can see that I have a really big snake in my hands. This is a red-tailed boa, and these guys are native to South America. However, snakes are very common in the pet trade. A lot of people get big snakes when they're small, thinking they're super cute, and then they get to really big sizes like Rocky here. He's about 5 feet long and about 10 pounds, and they decide it's too much to take care of. An invasive species that is native to Southeast Asia is what we call the Burmese python. Now, this is a red-tailed boa, but Burmese pythons are another type of big snake. They're supposed to live in Southeast Asia. However, they used to be people's pets down in places like the Everglades in Florida, and they got out, either on accident. There was a story of a pet store being hit by a hurricane and some of the snakes got out that way, or on purpose. People who have these Burmese pythons as pets, they get too big and they don't want them anymore. And they love the snake and they're embarrassed to find it another home, so they let the snake outside. Many well-intentioned people who just want that snake to be happy let it outside, and then unfortunately it invades. So Burmese pythons live down in the Everglades, in the wetlands in Florida, and they are eating animals like alligators, particularly young ones and juvenile ones. Alligators are supposed to be at the top of the food chain in Florida, but when these big snakes that can get close to 20 feet long come about, that is a predator that is not supposed to be there. They've even found some endangered animal species, like an endangered rat species, in the belly of these pythons. One female Burmese python can lay up to 100 eggs. And the only way to get rid of them is for scientists to go out into the field and catch them one at a time. So invasive species are a big problem in ecosystems. It's not just that sometimes they kill and eat other animals. Oftentimes, they're simply taking the food and the water and the shelter away from the animals who are supposed to live there. One of the biggest types of people who accidentally let invasive species out are actually science teachers. Science teachers, they bring animals into their classroom for the school year so that their kids can study them and learn about them, but then they don't know what to do for the summer, so they let them outside. Again, this problem isn't meant to be mean, but when an animal is let outside to an area it's not supposed to be in, one of two things happens. That animal either dies by starving or by freezing, or the animal thrives. And when it thrives, it takes away resources from the other animals in that ecosystem who are supposed to be there. In the United States alone, scientists estimate that we have over 50,000 invasive species of plants and animals. So please remember, if you have a pet and you don't want it anymore, or you can't take care of it, it's okay to call the zoo, call the Humane Society, find a home for it. But please never let animals outside that are not supposed to be there unless you are supervising them, because we don't want them to take away from the resources of our native animals and to mess up the beautiful balance that our food chains have. These are super delicate balances, and we need to do everything we can, Rocky agrees, to keep these animals that are supposed to be there in the right habitats. So, if you are in 5th grade, what I want you guys to do is I actually have a worksheet that is linked in the video here. And I want you to do one of two things. You are going to either research a current invasive species that really exists, or if you want to get creative, you can make your own. You need to draw it on the front here, and then on the back, I want you to answer questions about that invasive species, like its name, where it lives, how did it get to its new location, how do you control it? All of these questions, and then take a picture and put it in the comments like always. So that is the end of our 5th grade lesson for today, but I will take some questions. If anybody has any questions on Rocky Balboa or any other types of invasive species or symbiotic relationships. Okay. So while we're waiting on questions, I do want to show you guys the python skin that we have on the table. This one is about 12 feet long, but snakes, they can get super big. The largest snake in the world is actually a 2-fold answer. The longest snake is the reticulated python. They can get 30 feet long. And the heaviest snake is the anaconda. They can get over 500 pounds, which is very impressive. Now Rocky here, he'll probably only get 15 or 20 pounds, and he's not native to Kansas. The biggest snake in Kansas is the bull snake, also known as the gopher snake, and they get about 8 feet long. So we don't have any big snakes like this native to Kansas. So if you ever see a big snake in the backyard, please call the zoo. We'll come and get it. That is an animal that is not supposed to be there if it's this big. Also, one final thing on invasive species before we go is that scientists spend over $100 billion each year trying to control them. It is a big economic problem as well as environmental. So you guys, we need your help to keep our ecosystem safe. And Rocky's going under the table. He's gonna show you how well he climbs. Alrighty, well you guys, thank you so much for learning today. We will see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Bye!